The place in my soul that got rocked through psychedelics, that place never goes away or is diminished. In fact, it's probably more so because through time, at the time it seemed to me, I was like 18 when I was on the bus, when I got on the bus, that
literally and figuratively.
Yes. At the time, it seemed when we were doing the acid tests and, the Grateful Dead was playing, that was our band, and we were traveling around doing these events, that the ripple effect of shifting consciousness was going to just go across the planet, and the world would really change rapidly. And
what happened?
Yeah, exactly.
Here we are in 2019, and things didn't work out quite like you'd hoped.
So some things totally did change, and some things are in the culture that were not then, and there's been a lot. But so when I was saying it's even more now, I think it's even more important to embody and share the best of those values.
Mm-hmm. How does a 19-year-old get swept up with Ken Kesey?
18.
18-year-old. How does that happen? I
was at school at UC Berkeley at the time. And
okay, I'm connecting the dots.
Right. And my first, so this was like when I came into Cal as a freshman, which was October of 64, within a few weeks, the free speech movement started, and I was involved in that right from the get-go. So that was a pretty tumultuous and interesting first semester of college.
You had those inclinations. You didn't
totally
get corrupted the minute you went to Berkeley.
Oh, no. Yeah.
I
went to Berkeley because I really was political, and I wanted to be a part of the solution of changing the world through the political system and through music, which was my other passion. So I thought, because I was raised with Kennedy, and at that time there was there had been the Alliance for Progress, Alianza, working with South America, seeing what kind of partnerships could be forged in our continent. And I had gone to Stanford for the summer and studied the Latin American studies, and I just thought that politics was really going to change, and that civil rights, everything was going to. I just thought the follies of the culture that I had been born into and that we had sort of inherited were, now that we'd seen the injustice up close, that we were really going to change it. And at the time, the regents of the University of California were the powerful business interests in California. And it turns out, we're hooked in with the J. Edgar Hoover and a lot of the federal powers and sort of military-industrial conflict.
Sure.
And so as the students became more active and aware on campus and started organizing picket lines in Oakland at the Oakland Tribune, which was owned by William Nolan, who was a regent of the University of California, or picketing the car dealerships on Van Ness that had unfair hiring practices. I mean, all of the business here, if they were first of all complicit in their own hiring practices, but then they also, some of them were parts of chains of theaters or other chained businesses that in the South were still segregated.
It's like picking up the rock and watching the bugs scurry and just seeing how deep everything is and how much everything's connected.
Yeah. And so, when the students started protesting, like the free speech movement, there was a big backlash from the powers, the big business powers. And it was a big wake-up call because I was sort of an innocent, and I grew up in San Francisco and had liberal parents.
You were in a bubble.
I was, I just couldn't imagine that anybody would, once they saw what was right and soulful to do, that they wouldn't just give up some power to have things be right.
I actually went to Santa Cruz, which I think is probably spiritually pretty similar in a lot of ways. And I kind of think of that as kind of getting away, as being in a bubble. In a strange way, it had sort of the opposite effect on you.
I mean, I'd seen it, in witnessing, the newspapers of the civil rights movement or something, but I hadn't personally experienced, being beaten up like I was in Sproul Hall by the Oakland cops and taken to jail. And I just turned 18 a few weeks before. And I also hadn't experienced before the sense of the power of unity of people when we get together for something that is important. And to see Mario Savio, who was, one of the main spokespeople of the free speech movement, stand on a car in Sproul Hall Plaza and so eloquently express what we were all feeling. And he wasn't the only one, but he was pretty captivating and brilliant.
So you felt like at that point that obviously the momentum was behind you and that you had the ability to do it. I guess what was the game plan? How were you going to change the world?
I mean, right off the bat, what we were trying to do was keep our free speech rights on the campus, because I had gone to Berkeley with what drew me there and kind of away from the Palo Alto area where I had gone to my last part of high school and gone to Stanford for the summer, was the kind of political foment and crossfiring and all the different organizations, and I wanted to hear what everybody had to say. And you could go on the Berkeley campus in those days and there'd be card tables all around Sproul Hall Plaza with people like the anarchists and the SDS and Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and the socialists and the anarchists and whatever. You could just sort of go talk to people and hear their ideas, and it was sort of this free flow of ideas that I was really excited to be in the middle of, because I wanted to kind of take a look at everything from political theory to courses of action. How do we make a difference in the world? So that's why I went there, was for those tables and those conversations and people on those soapboxes. And I just wanted to hear that. So right away, when the campus police came and took the tables away, I was like, no, wait, that's not okay.
This is literally why I'm here, and you're taking that away from me.
When you say, what was the plan of action? The first plan of action was to say that just because we enrolled in this university and walked onto the campus doesn't mean that we had in any way given up our free speech rights that are guaranteed to citizens of this country. So we were fighting to keep those, to keep all those channels open. And I think, the university was sort of this big brother and was thinking, well, we're just going to keep these students. You can't be an activist if you're a student. You're just going to be a student. And I think that, we won that. 800 of us plus were arrested.
When does the bus roll up?
So later that year in the spring, I knew some people that had taken some psychedelics, and I was interested. I didn't ever really drink. I've never been a person that liked alcohol, and I'm really not a smoker of any kind, but psychedelics was interesting.
That was at that point a less essential part of that movement on campus, the drugs?
Yeah, that really was kind of a separate thing. The political people, for the most part, weren't so drawn to the kind of psychedelic realm, but
they weren't tuning in, turning on and dropping out quite yet.
It was, but LSD was legal then too, or let's say it wasn't illegal. So it was legal in that sense, And so I had heard about it, and some people that I knew who were really interesting philosophy teachers and, people that I knew that were into kind of more things spiritual and martial arts and things like that were exploring psychedelics. And I was interested. I've always been interested in anything to do with consciousness. I did yoga as a young person, and, I just kind of always interested in what is this reality? And does each of us have our own view and story, and what's common underneath that? Is there something? What is this energy we call life?
This is kind of a way to jumpstart that.
Right. Because, it's easy to be invested in or stuck in or just limited to what we came up in. So to actually have that dissolve and kind of see that this reality that is malleable, and there's so many energies and so many kind of levels and so many ways to experience living or being.
You're kind of asking around on the fringes, trying to see how to get some of the stuff?
Well, it sort of just came, I didn't have to look. It was just
try too hard.
That I happened to be, meeting, were exploring that, and I was interested. So I started doing that in the spring of 65 and had some really profound experiences that were life-altering. Because,
granted, maybe this is sort of the Tom Wolfe effect, but it seemed like a formal process, the acid test at the time, the whole, I don't know if ceremonial is the right word, but there was a whole process for it when they were kind of bringing it around and turning people on.
Well, it was definitely an exploration, a group exploration. And I think having the container of the acid test, having the container of a place where people could if they wanted to drink the electric Kool-Aid and have a place where there was music and there was lights and there were, that reality was very, when you look back from now, it doesn't seem like much, but at the time, I mean, just even to have a strobe light was completely revolutionary, right? So lights, sound, all of that, and a place where if somebody wanted to kind of let go of their reality or personality or just melt, there was a safe place to do that. Yeah. And you could kind of just be dancing energy with music. With great music, and you could just kind of let your molecules flow.
You almost need a chaperone, or, I know if you're taking like peyote or something, it's the idea of like having a shaman, having somebody who can like help you through it if things go bad, which they sometimes do.
Well, I think that if for, people now, to always make sure that you're in a safe space and you have at least somebody there, if not more than one somebody's. Yeah. That's helping make a container for you and that you can be within people you trust. And I guess I always think it's really good to be around nature. But, at the time we were really exploring this. We didn't have much of a rule book.
You were making it up, yeah.
I think now there's a lot of research that's been done, and there are things that have been sort of learned culturally about this exploration.
Did Kesey seem to know what he was doing at the time? I mean, people were, following him around.
Well, he sort of yes and no. I mean, it was really a group exploration. Yeah. And it was, Kesey was paying attention as much to everyone else that was on the bus and learning. We were all kind of learning from each other and from the kids. Kesey's kids were there. And so it wasn't like Kesey was... we were kind of all learning from each other. And I think everybody had different...
bringing different things to the table.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Bringing, we had Neil Cassidy driving the bus a lot.
Who had been through some stuff already, yeah.
Yeah, and then Ken Babbs. Mountain Girl was and still is amazing. And George Walker and Roy Seaburn and Paul Foster. And all of the different pranksters... brought a different flavor to the soup,
You sort of seek it out, you find it pretty quickly, and then all roads kind of lead to the Merry Pranksters?
Oh, well, how it happened was I was playing with some guys that, a band that they were friends of mine, and sometimes I played with them, but we had taken this kind of very potent acid trip, and then a few days later ended up taking the band down to a conference down in Monterey because our guitar player Chip's father was the head of the Star King Theological School for Unitarian ministers. Okay. And they were having the big Unitarian ministers conference down at Silomar on the beach at Monterey, the conference ground. And Dr. Wright had invited us to come down and play and bring the band down. Then so we brought some gear down and drove down to Monterey, and the keynote speaker of that weekend was Kesey, and the pranksters were all there with the bus, and I'd never heard of a prankster and I'd never heard of Kesey, and we just drove onto the conference ground, and there was this brightly painted bus, and just sort of having come off a kind of, life-altering acid trip was all kind of perfect.
I talk to artists about this all the time, especially people who aren't, you're from San Francisco, the Bay Area, especially people who are from, rural areas, other places where there isn't a lot of necessarily creativity or culture in the way that we appreciate it. And to a person, everyone talks about this idea of kind of finding their group of weirdos, finding like the other people, right. And you did that quite literally, though. You were there. It's not, by the way, it sounds like the Unitarians were pretty cool at the time. You were there. You saw this group of people with this brightly colored bus, and you were like, those are my people?
Well, I went and spent the night on the beach with Kesey, and we, and at that point, we talked a lot about everything. And, unlike now with all the widespread use, even if it's been underground up until more recently, of psychedelics, there's a lot of conversation, and there are kind of realms that can be navigated that there's some knowledge about. Mm-hmm. But in those days, to actually find someone you could try and describe the indescribable to, that I didn't really have that. So that's what was kind of amazing of just talking to Kesey all night, was just how, it was like there was no map for what I had been exploring on my own and trying to make sense of and trying to understand. And so I had a lot of thoughts and a lot of kind of ways to try and point to something. And
it was hard to articulate.
It was. It still is. As you can see, I'm just blah.
Yeah.
But finding Kesey was deep. And at the end of that weekend, we went back to Berkeley, and I was in my sophomore year at school, going to summer school, starting my sophomore year. And few days later, he drove up to my apartment in Berkeley and just said, "I've come to get you. You're on the bus."
You left school at that point?
I did. I finished a lot later, but at the time, I just said, okay.
Did you ever regret that decision?
No.
No?
No.
How seriously were you taking music at the time?
Well, I was writing all the time, playing guitar. And so, I wasn't studying music at school. I was just playing. I had, all my guitars and things like that. So I've always been a writer, like a songwriter. I'm a lyric person. And so I'd been writing, some of my earlier things were kind of folk influenced.
The timing's right for that.
The civil rights movement, because when I was in high school, I was the only high school member of the Stanford Folk Music Club when I was in high school. And a lot of those people a number of them had been in the South for Freedom Summer, and they'd been doing voter registration. And for somebody in high school, I got some pretty direct transmission from people who were, seniors,
field
graduate students,
Appalachian.
Not so much musically, but just more like what it was really like for them in the South when they were, and so, and what it was like, if you grew up in San Francisco at that time, especially me being a little white girl, I'd never been to Mississippi or Alabama, and to hear them talk about what life was like for people there, for people of color there. Yeah. So that, got my heart, so I write about civil rights and things like that.
Did you end up going down there?
I didn't.
You didn't?
At that time, no. Then, I ended up getting on the bus, so.
You made it. You took a slight
thing.
diversion.
Yeah.
In terms of actually pursuing music, I don't know if professionally is the right word. I don't know how seriously you take ideas like that when you're 18, 19 years old anyway. But seeing what was happening in San Francisco at the time must have been pretty hopeful.
Well, that was all just starting. I mean, because this is we're talking 64, 65. So the people that, a little bit later.
Sure. So Dylan was just sort of,
right.
The Beatles were just starting to.
Right. And so, and the kind of this, what turned into kind of the San Francisco sound here, a lot of those people were coming out of the folk world. The Jefferson Airplane, Yorma was kind of coming out of blues, and David Freiberg and Quicksilver, those, David was kind of coming out of a more folk background.
Yeah. And you knew the Moby Grape guys.
I played with those guys when they weren't from here, they were from Seattle, and they moved down here in the, 65. 65. And they were pretty well known in Seattle. They were called the Frantics, and they were great musicians, and they came down here, and I ended up joining 3 of them, and we called our band the Luminous Marsh Gas, and we played for some months, and then we were living down the peninsula, and I was just and there was just sort of something else that I wanted, a much more kind of psychedelic approach. Yeah. And so the keyboard player from there, Charlie Schoening, and I and my friend Martha Winter, and I left that band and came up to San Francisco and got an apartment in the Haight, right off by the Panhandle.
You were just in bands pretty much right out of the gate?
I was the last one to meet the rest of the band members, and that was on New Year's Eve, 1966, turning into 1967.
It's a pretty momentous occasion.
Mm-hmm. And they had already started just playing together and jamming, but nobody really kind of, at that point, it was totally... they were talking about being a band, but I would say it was loose. It was pretty loose. And then I joined, I started playing with them, and then I was working at Fantasy Records at the time. And I'd already made a single. I'd made a record the year before. So I sort of had more experience in the music world in that way. And we started practicing at Fantasy Records. And then John Fogerty, who also worked there, his band was the Golliwogs. And so we shared the alternating nights in the studio. Max, who owned Fantasy at the time, let us, their band would take 3 nights a week and we'd take the other 3 nights a week. And so Fantasy was a very small label then. And John and I were the only young people who worked there. And then there was 3 partners and 1 other person. So.
Whatever happened to that Fogerty guy? Did he go anywhere?
Yeah, no. He just wrote a bunch of great songs and disappeared,
Were you taking it a little more seriously than the rest of the band members at the time?
Well, I think by the time we really started playing together and we started practicing at Fantasy and we started, all kinds of things happened really quickly for us. And I think when we got together, then it just we gelled and everybody was ready to go on the journey. Then we got some support, originally from Max, who helped us rent some better equipment than what we had because we were quite a motley crew of, funky little, 1 drum or a cymbal or whatever it was. We didn't have much. And so we were able to rent some gear. And then as we kept going, we got our first manager, Ambrose Hollingsworth, and he and his friend Leslie Scardelli made it possible for us to really get some good gear. And I got to go to Sherman Clay, which was the music store down. It's like right a few blocks from where we are right now, downtown San Francisco. And we got to pick out the gear that we wanted. So we got a couple of twin reverbs and a couple of dual Showman amps and big Fender amps. And I got a beautiful Gibson Tal Farlow. And Diane got a really beautiful set of Ludwig drums. And
kids in the handy store. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was pretty amazing. Yeah. And that set of Ludwig drums, when we, a few months later, opened in Golden Gate Park for Jimi Hendrix, all of that gear is what he played. So you can, if you ever see pictures of that show in the Panhandle of Jimi Hendrix, they were playing on our equipment. So it's a good thing we had some good equipment by then.
So I think that's one of the things that's really fascinating about the band in hindsight is things, at least looking back, it sounds like things were coming together pretty quickly. The opportunities, obviously, relatively small scene, Fogerty's around there. You're playing with Hendrix not too long after that. That all comes together really quickly. And then the band just doesn't really take off beyond that. You kind of hit a ceiling at a certain point.
Well, we played, those first 3 years, we played a whole bunch. Yeah. Right. And recorded background vocals for other bands that were recording here, the Airplane and Quicksilver and other Mike Bloomfield. So we were both playing our own music and playing a lot. Yeah. If you look at we have this list of all the gigs we played. It was
you were very much a known quantity at the time.
Yes, we were. Yeah. And, but in those days, you needed to get a record deal to kind of make the next step. And the record labels that came to see the other bands that were, they were sort of the first bands that were signed, Quicksilver, the Airplane, then Moby Grape, Stop with Camel, of course, Santana. But, it's always hard to know. But I think because we were 5 women and we all sang, so there wasn't just one lead singer to focus on. I think we were just sort of outside the norm of what people that were A&R guys from record labels that came from New York and LA, basically. The music industry, I think, and was always sort of looking for who's the next Beatles or who's the next, Birds after the Birds got big.
They've seen a pattern that works and they look to recreate it.
So I think 5 hippie girls, all of whom sing all different kinds of styles of music because we all wrote and we had all kinds of influences. And I think, if you listen to our record, the new one, that's out now, it's got a lot of different musical influences. And it's not, in those days, there wasn't so much like the idea of genres like there is now, but still we were, we didn't ever feel that there was anything we couldn't do if we could do it. It wasn't like, oh, well, we shouldn't do something a cappella or we shouldn't make up this or we shouldn't, do some jazz tunes, work on these, it was sort of like, well, anything that we felt we could try and give a good go at, it's like, why not?
Do you have any regrets from the standpoint of having wished that you were a little more maybe commercially focused, that you were, kind of sniffing around, seeing what was successful and able to go in that direction?
We've never done that. We don't do that now. We didn't do that then. I really feel that it's not my business whose hearts our music reaches. We just have to play the music the best that we can, that we want to play and we love.
But obviously you want as many people to hear it as possible.
Sure, we'd love that to happen. But what, it's sort of like, you put something out there and I'd love people to get a chance to hear it. And then some of those people go, what's this? Doesn't do much for me. And somebody else goes, this is the music I've been waiting for all my life. Because we've had both of those kind of responses. Sure. And some people just go, I love this. This is amazing. And those are the hearts that we're meant to connect with, and other people, somebody else is going to do that thing for them. And so it's not like we want to play in a closet. I mean, we want to share our music and reach whoever is going to resonate with it. We, love to, have people give us a listen. And then, if we speak to them and speak to their hearts and souls and they get a laugh or want to get up and dance or, want to rock their baby, whatever they, if we can reach them, then that's who we're here to do that with,
I talk to a lot of bands and they often tell me that in order for it to be successful, it needs to sort of be run like a dictatorship, in that everybody needs to have clearly defined roles, and it's useful if somebody is kind of running the show, right? If there's like one person with the vision. You guys just weren't built like that, though. I'm probably if somebody has to speak for the band more fully, I will do that. You're quite literally doing that right now.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. But we love everybody to be able to say, their part and to answer questions. And we don't always agree on things. It's really good to have the different perspectives that we have. And, there is not a dictatorship in our band at all.
I mean, there ultimately was, though it sounds like friction. That's why the band sort of ended up splitting.
Well, I think we were having children by later on. Yeah. And because we didn't have a record deal and we sort of didn't get that financial inflow that, that like a dance on an album would have given, in those days, we were having to figure out childcare and how to travel and, not really kind of moving to the next level financially. And it just was kind of hard. As I've said before, our brother bands were having children then too, but they had wives and girlfriends, who took care of the kids so they could travel. But we, especially we were nursing mothers at times. We couldn't leave those babies, So then we would have to take people with us, and that'll,
it's hard to play the guitar with one hand.
Right. And Mary Gandon was playing bass, and she was 8 months pregnant, So I think there was that piece of it was challenging for us. And at a certain point, I think for any woman playing, if you're a mom and if you don't have a really good support system, it's, you have to make some tough choices. And, for us, we just, there was just sort of no way to continue the way that we were. We would have had to either taken that next step. And, in those days, the other thing was that if you signed a record deal, and this was really common, you had to basically agree to tour for a year. And you had to go do these things that I forgot there was a name for it. It's like where you'd go into record stores and play all over the country. And,
sort of like a junket.
So many bands that I knew broke up doing those, Sons of Champlin, went off and did one. They came back that we're done, so, and that's just something when we kind of looked at even the possibility of signing a record deal, how could we go tour for a year behind a record, So those were all, and touring was, I don't know that it's easier now. I wouldn't say that. The internet changes things, because you have to have a record to be on the radio. You have to be on the radio is how you get a chance to go play those larger gigs, because otherwise nobody knows you. There was no internet. It was like, if you didn't have music on the radio, you couldn't just go to some other town and sell out a show because people didn't know who you were because you weren't on the radio.
It's a mixed bag now. You can do more for yourself, and everybody kind of by default does. But the flip side of it is that there's no record label infrastructure in the way there was. There's no big machine to support you.
Exactly. So you have to do it all.
So it sounds like you stuck it out a little bit longer though than the rest of the band members. You were playing for you were playing in the band a little while longer, right?
Well, I would say really, Mary Ellen left and went up to way northern California, and she and her husband and some
We're talking
Tim
like
from
Eureka area.
They were up in Trinity Alps, and now that she lives in Weaverville, which is,
I don't know where that is either.
It's like north.
But I'm picturing
north.
something when I think of the word Weaverville. I have a very specific picture in my brain.
Exactly. We're going to go play there in a couple of weeks. Yeah.
On a farm of some kind,
no,
probably?
we're actually playing a big theater, and we're doing it as a benefit for the Humane Society there. So we're excited to go to Mary's hometown. Marla left. Mary Ellen had already gone, and so Diane and Mary Gannon and I kept playing for some period longer, and sometimes when our husbands or boyfriends or our drum teacher Jerry Grinelli came and played some shows with us. But by then it was we were kind of slowly dissolving, but we still love playing. And then I moved to Kauai. Actually, I went to Kauai thinking I was going to be there for not too long, and then I stayed, and then Mary Gannon followed me, so we lived there. Well, she still lives there with her husband and kids and grandkids, and I live there part-time now.
When the band was officially done, did it feel like you were done with music?
Oh, no. Never. No one was ever done with music. Everyone has played their whole lives.
How did that manifest itself at the time? How did you keep playing?
When I got to Kauai, I played in a number of bands there, sometimes with Mary Gannon. She had a bunch of children, so she was a little less available. But I played in a number of different bands, and also played Hawaiian music, like more. I got really into Hawaiian music with my ex-boyfriend, and
slide guitar and that whole.
I ended up playing dulcimer with his slack key guitar, and but he was raised on Oahu and played, had lots of gigs, and so I really fell in love with Hawaiian music. It's somewhere in there, like around 1980, I shifted from guitar to bass. I was playing with a country band, actually. Some friends of mine that were starting a country band
in Hawaii.
In Kauai, which was popular. There's a real link between, first of all, Hawaiian music and country, and then also there's a Paniolo or the kind of cowboy scene. There's a lot of great Hawaiian music that's also related to the ranches, because there's a big connection with pedal steel, lap steel, and that kind of harmony. So country. And then there's, Kauai, and all the islands have rodeos and have ranches. The biggest ranch is on the Big Island Parker Ranch, but then Kauai where I lived, has some ranches on both the North Shore and the South Shore.
I love that you're from out west, but you had to go to Hawaii to really take part in the cowboy scene.
Right,
That's very funny.
Well, I was always a horse person too, but I wasn't a cowgirl. I was more of a jumper, so in my early days, but I loved being around animals and that world. And that music, I'm not at all up on country music now, but Hank Williams, and also I love music from the kind of more, kind of bluegrass. And so we, in that band, the guys, my friend who started that band his mother was from Louisiana, his dad was from Mississippi. So he, brought a lot of music into my life.
Yeah.
So
Buck Owens was from California.
When you start playing bass, a country bass is a really good place to start. Yeah. You can kind of work with those roots and fifths and kind of, start to move around on the neck and not have to do something too complex to start. So, from the time I started playing bass, we were playing within a month. I had a 6-night-a-week gig. So, I was playing a lot.
There was a need for bass players, so you picked up the bass, or how did you make that transition?
I always had wanted to play bass. I loved the bass, but Mary Gannon was our bass player in the Ace of Cups. And then when I wasn't playing with her at that point, I just got the chance to kind of move on to bass. And I love where that sits in the music, because you're kind of at the...
You're kind of a rhythm.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. You're kind of at the bottom of the harmony, and you're the intersection of harmony and rhythm. And I love that place. And it's kind of gets me right in the lower belly, and I love the instrument, and I'm kind of a groove appreciator. I'm not like a virtuoso kind of bass player, although I appreciate them. My bass teacher is an incredible player, and I love to watch what he does. But, I'm a pretty simple player, but I just love to be in that place in the music. And
you're still taking lessons?
Oh, yeah.
What do you feel like you have left to learn at this point?
Oh, my gosh. Endless.
Yeah.
I'm like an ant in the among the giants of music and my instrument, you know.
You must have figured something out in, 30, 40 years.
School, I went to music school in LA, but no, I'm a very simple player. And, I'd love to, if I had a parallel life, one of the things I would do would be to go back to music school and just learn. Cause I just feel, when I got out of the program I went to was only a year-long program. It was the Musicians Institute in LA. And at the end of that year, I was like, now I want to start school. I just felt like I could love to just, I'd sort of like come up enough of a level to be able to really feel like I could really get started, but I couldn't do that.
What was the time period when you went to school for music?
83, 84.
83, 84. What was the goal? What did you hope to get out of music school?
Just be a better bass player. Well, because I had switched to bass in 1980, right? So I hadn't been playing bass for that long. And then when I got into this program, I just thought I could jumpstart this instrument, my relationship with this instrument. And it just sort of was a time in my life where I could actually do that. My daughter had gone to boarding school for in Palo Alto. And and the hurricane had hit the house that we were living in. And I was just like, okay, I could actually do this.
We were talking about this before off camera, but that was literally a sign from God of being like, hey, maybe it's time to make a transition in your life.
Yeah.
You never gave up on the hope or idea of being a professional musician, of having that?
I always played. Yes. And it wasn't like I was trying to, take the recording world by storm or anything like that. I just wanted to play. I love playing with people. So, if there's a session, a jam session, if people want to sit around and sing and play. That's what I've done my whole life. And I think, the Ace of Cups, especially Mary Gannon and I through the years, we, even on Kauai when we had our families, we'd have these big family jams at our house. We had 50 people at our house sitting around with, everything from infants to elders, and we'd all be singing and playing. There's something about human voices together and raising children where that's kind of you're raising children in a circle or a container. That music is something you make. It's not something you're a consumer of. It's not something you go buy. You don't have to know a lot. You could know 2 or 3 chords on an instrument, on ukulele or a guitar or a piano or whatever, and you could sing yourself. You could sing songs that will, rock your heart for the rest of your life with 3 chords, There's just nothing that is a barrier from, it's human beings. We're wired to sing together. Like we're wired to play, percussion. We're wired to play music. And that all the studies that are being done now about happiness, like people live longer and are happier if they join their voices with other people, whether it's a church choir or a barbershop quartet or whatever it is, that there's something. And if you go back to more tribal living situations, people sing together and people dance together and people dance together to rhythms. It's in our DNA to need that. And, we just live in a world or a culture that has divided people from all of us being musicians, all of us being able to sing and play and dance. You're the person who has to sit over there and buy a really expensive ticket, and these people on the stage are the musicians. And that's one of the things going back to the acid test that just know, we're all in this together, and there's something much more unified and communal about this process than, the big stadiums and places would have us believe.
How does that relate to the acid test?
Well, because it was about this circuit of energy, and that you're not a passive observer of it, that this is something that we're all sharing. And I think, when you go to some people's shows, even if they are in big venues, some people that just everybody's singing along, that we want that, and I think I personally like littler venues. I like to, kind of have the intimacy of that, I'm one of my favorite venues is a campfire, but, I feel as though it's really important for us as human beings it's not just in music. I think it's in everything. It's like people get shut down early, the first grade teacher who says, you can't draw. That doesn't look like a house.
Yeah.
And then that person just shuts down. Yeah. How many of us have been shut down in so many ways in our creative flow, whatever that is. Our drummer, Diane, grew up in San Francisco, and she's a few years older than I, so it was even a little worse and when she was growing up, in that also she didn't have parents who kind of counteracted this. But from the time she was in grammar school, and there were music programs in grammar school, middle school, and high school that she went to. Every time she said she wanted to play the drums, she would be told, girls can't play the drums. You can play a tambourine. Junior high, same thing. High school, same thing. She didn't get to get on a drum kit till she was out of high school.
Even with all of the idealism and community, everything else that was happening in San Francisco in the 60s, was there still a pervasive sense of sexism when it came to a group of women playing together as a band?
I think not so much. I think when we first started playing, people would just kind of stare at us, you know.
You were a novelty.
We weren't a novelty like, oh, that's cute. It wasn't. It was just like people were just like, whoa, you know.
Which is good because people were looking to have their minds blown and you were doing it, right?
Exactly. So that, you know, but we didn't, I mean, there were individuals who were kind of, you know, a little, but overall, the community that we were part of, and, you know, lucky for us, we were in the Bay Area because, you know, everything was getting explored. And so, even though we'd never seen any all-women bands playing, when we started playing, people were like, oh, that's cool, you know. And we had people that really showed up to help us, both, you know, our managers. We had a second manager, Ron Pulte, and then his office had Quicksilver Messenger Service and Janis Joplin, Big Brother, and other bands that were part of our scene and that we played with a lot. And we always felt welcomed and supported and mentored. You know, there were certain players, you know, for both Mary Ellen and me. You know, Jorma Kaukonen from Jefferson Airplane. Jorma would just show us licks and, you know, lend us guitars. And so, you know, we had a lot of good energy from a lot of people, and that was great. I know that some women played in bands in other places subsequently and, you know, didn't have that experience. And so
obviously Janis was a woman that they knew what to do with. Grace Slick was a woman.
But they were fronting bands of men, of guys. That's a very different thing. Yeah. You know. How
much of that not being able to get to the next level was sexism, and how much of it was just you just being a strange anomaly that they couldn't figure out?
You know, I don't know that, you know, because, you know, it's hard to say, you know, what,
sure.
You know, I mean, we had some great shows. I mean, Jimi Hendrix loved us and, you know, talked
good
about us, and, you know,
you could like not do anything else for the rest of your life.
That's
and
enough,
you're like,
right? We could have just retired right then.
The email thread that we were emailing back and forth on was attached to a press release, and the lead thing was Jimi Hendrix said such and such. 40, 50 years later, like that's still a thing that you can hang your hat on.
Yeah. Because when he went back to England after he came to the Monterey Pop Festival, and then he came to San Francisco, and he was in the U.S., you know, because he'd been living out of the country, right? Even though he was American, he had been living in England, right? So he came back, and this was kind of the first time that people here got to hear him. And when he went back, he got asked by Melody Maker magazine, so, you know, what did you like in America? And he basically, in that article, I think he mentioned only Doug Somm, Sir Douglas in Austin. I think he was in Austin. Yeah. And us, and I think maybe quintet, one other band, if that. Yeah. So we were kind of high on his list of who he appreciated on his travels here, which was a huge compliment because he was amazing.
When people talk about Kurt Cobain, the music industry was so desperate to find another Nirvana that every time he wore the t-shirt of a band or mentioned a band during an interview, that band would get a record label, regardless of, like, Daniel Johnston, for example, who, you know, is a singer-songwriter from Austin, deeply schizophrenic, got a record deal because of this. It didn't have quite the same effect when Jimi Hendrix said something nice about you.
It was just early. You have to know. Yeah. It was just early time.
Yeah.
And I guess that was, you know, the Monterey at that point. There were a lot of people were hearing a lot of this music for the first time. I mean, everybody from Otis Redding to Janis to Electric Flag to, you know, all of these bands were Monterey was kind of a place from whence a much wider audience was then tapped into, because people came from everywhere to go there. And the word got out, but, you know, the word wasn't like it wasn't on the internet.
So did it, obviously, you know, you were doing some collaboration with some members of the band over time, but was there a sense that at some point the core group of women would get back together, that you would all play together again someday?
Not this way. Not like it is. We'd all get together through the years. We all lived in different places pretty much, but all through the years when we could afford it, because, you know, people had kids and families and we all lived in different places.
Y'all still liked each other.
Yes.
That's good.
And
if you had been a successful band, it might not have worked out that way.
We always feel that.
Also, the fact that you're all still around is pretty amazing.
Exactly. Upright, vertical, right?
Yeah.
Walking, dancing, playing. Yeah.
You can't look on things with too much regret because, again, if you had been, Jimmy's not around.
Right, exactly.
Probably a lot of the people you knew at the time.
Yeah. And sometimes that success could have contributed to what allowed them to, go in directions that killed them.
The next part of the story, so you guys get together, you play, I think, was it Wavy Gravy's birthday party?
We played for Wavy's 75th birthday. Yeah. And out of that was the original 5 of us all came together to do that.
Before you sort of get into the next part, how quickly did it come back when, the music playing together?
From the time that we said we'd play for Wavy's birthday, we rented a place for 12 days, a rehearsal space, and just worked on it to put a set together for that event. After that, so, in a certain way, you could sort of say, well, after 12 days of playing, we did a big show.
Sure. It took some work, though, to...
Oh, yeah. Because it was like, what songs are we going to do? Sure. It was, what keys are we going to do them in? Just everything, just working things.
People's voices change.
Exactly. Right, yes. What songs kind of... sort of have... what songs do we still feel now? What songs we do feel, but we don't have time to rearrange them the way that we probably want to. So there was a lot.
Did you remember most of them well enough to just play them? Yeah. Muscle memory.
It's just songs.
Yeah.
Just like your children.
They are, but you do so many over the years and some.
Yeah. But I guess for me, that's kind of like, I'm like, I can tell you like in a lot of cases where I was standing when lyrics came through or where we were, I remember that stuff a lot, just kind of felt like, like there was a channel coming through or something. So that I don't remember like phone numbers, but I remember lyrics. Yeah.
When it does come time to take it a little more seriously, when you're talking about actually recording really with a label for the first time, what were those conversations like with family members? Were they like, mothers and grandmothers at this point? Were they supportive?
Yes. Yeah. I think, first of all, after the Wavy Gravy birthday, which was in 2011, the 3 of us, Mary Ellen, our guitarist, and our drummer Diane and I decided we just wanted to get together and start to play semi-regularly. And George, who owns our record label, George Bear Wallace, who had sponsored us to go play for Wavy Gravy's event, he wanted to make it possible for us to get together and just play. He was still thinking that we were going to find some other archival material because his label is a boutique label that mostly is an archival,
reissues,
He just sort of made it possible for us to come together every 7-8 weeks and spend 4 or 5 days playing and then go home and then come back. And we started writing and we just got into it. We did that for at least a couple of years.
There was a collection, was it 2011?
No, 2004.
2004. Okay, so this was way before all that happened, but that was kind of everything, right? That was everything that existed of you on record.
Pretty much, yes.
And it was like sound checks and live shows,
yes,
things
exactly.
like that.
And that was Alec Palau from Ace Records, coincidentally, with the name of the label, but it's an English label, a British label, and they wanted to release something of ours, and we had, these reel-to-reel tapes that Mary Gannon and Diane had like schlepped from California to Hawaii and had gone through a hurricane and brought them back. So they were in whatever condition they were in. But
so there was even before you got back together for this birthday, there was some interest at least.
Yeah, we had a website by then, and people were writing to us, and that music was sort of the first thing that the thing that was on the live album was those recordings were made like at the side of a stage at some gig, and they were made never for release. They were made basically for us to hear what was working or not working in our set so that it would be for our own education. It's like now we just take our iPhone out, do a voice memo and like, oh, okay. I was listening to them on the way here just now from today. Just listening to how the harmonies are working on this new song or working on things like that. So that was why we had those tapes pretty much, because none of them were like in a recording studio songs that we were actually working on the way other bands did at that time, just overdubbing or whatever, laying down tracks. None of them were that. So, but at least it was something, and that got out, and because some people who had an interest in the music of that era heard that, one of those was George Bear Wallace, who was very, passionate about the music of that time, especially San Francisco music. And when he heard that record, he kind of got fascinated with us. And so if the first record hadn't come out, the live one, we wouldn't be here talking at this point. So that was... Before
you came back to the city tonight, you were in Nevada rehearsing for a 6-week tour.
Right.
You were talking to me about the new music you're working on now. It's not a one-off, obviously. This is something you're taking very seriously now.
Well, we've already got our second double album pretty much, not all the way done, but I would say 3/4 done.
Once the momentum starts...
Yeah, well, once we got into the studio, when George said, "Okay, you need to go he said, after we'd been, doing this playing for those couple of years that I mentioned, he said, "You never got to go take this music into a studio. You need to do that. So let's do it." So we went from just playing to play to saying, "Okay, we're gonna record." And then luckily we found our producer Dan Shea, who is amazing. He really walked us through this process because we hadn't really had much experience. We'd done background vocals for people, but as a band, we hadn't. So, there was a lot to work with in terms of all this material, but we have so many songs. So we thought we were going to record 12 songs, and then it went to 16, then it went to 21, and then went to 26, and, it started to be an album, and then it was a double album, and
it's
then
just it's like water pressure, years, all of this backing up, and then somebody opens up the spigot.
Exactly. It's like all the albums we never got to make, right?
Yeah.
So now we have 36 songs down. So we released 20, I'm not sure on this one, because we have little vignettes on this one too. I think 21 or 22 songs plus some vignettes on the first double album. And then we have another double album coming out in about a year.
You get to a certain point in your life and, time obviously becomes more precious.
Yes. That's where we're not going to wait another 50 years to make finish the second album.
Not even another 50 weeks from the sound of it.
Not even.
You were living in Hawaii and teaching yoga. You're probably in pretty good condition, but
but you never know.
You never know,
and
you never know even
anything.
how long you're going to be able to sort of stand up. Exactly. I mean, you mentioned a 6-week tour, and that sounds grueling to me.
Well, we'll see. We haven't done this, so we'll see how it goes. Yeah. We're pretty excited about it. I'm excited with the 2 festivals that we're playing. We're doing some other venues too, but the 2 festivals we're playing, the Kate Wolf Festival at the end of June up in Laytonville, and then we're playing the Oregon Country Fair, and I'm camping at both of those. I'm excited. Not everybody's camping. Some people are in little motels or whatever, but I'm excited. My grandson and daughter are coming to Kate Wolf, and we're excited to be able to kind of be out in community at the festivals. I'm really, and it's like the Oregon. Well, both of those festivals have people that we've known for 50 plus years as part of those festivals.
I want to get back to something we were talking about earlier, the beginning of the conversation of this hopefulness that you had at the time, this sense that things were changing and that a group of people could come together and change the world. Obviously a lot of positive did come of that, civil rights movement, Vietnam War ended. It's now universally accepted that it was a terrible, horrible war. I remember how I felt walking around New York City the day after the election.
Right.
And I'm asking this for myself as much as anything else. I mean, how do you stay hopeful that we're moving, that sort of, I guess in kind of like geological time, that things are generally moving in the right direction?
We don't have geological time anymore as human beings. I mean, the planet's made.
Planet,
yeah. But, we have till
12 years is what I was.
Yeah, not that long before.
It's like that David Bowie song.
Right.
5 years.
That some of the things that make me hopeful are things like Greta Thunberg, the young woman I think she's from Sweden, Thunberg, who basically single-handedly started this movement in Europe that is now here, for, climate. Mm-hmm. For the climate. And when I hear young people who are articulate and committed, and, that gives me hope. And, it's like, there's no choice except for us to live the most conscious lives that we can and work for what matters. It's, I can't remember whose wonderful quote it was, but, activism is the rent I pay for being here. It's like we need to, obviously there are many places to take a stand and work, and you can't do all of it. And so you do the ones that you can do, and you trust other people will pick up some of the other pieces. And
does music still feel like a venue for that for you?
Totally. And in these days of women coming, women being heard, I think in ways that, that over the last few years that women have a more potent voice or a more powerful voice. Women are being listened to. And given that I think more than sexism, ageism is an issue in our world, that we have a really unique platform right now as women in our 70s, and kind of breaking up some notions of what aging is, and also just making our voices heard for what matters. And, there's just no alternative but to live the most conscious life that you can. I mean, everybody finds their way with this, but I think we need to not kid ourselves. Need to, for me, it shows up. I'm a vegan. Plastic pollution is something that's a big issue for me. So when you can see me, I came in with my mug and my little ceramic bowl with my salad in it. I travel like that. And it's and other people have the pieces of this whole puzzle that they're working with that we get, we learn from and get informed by. I mean, there's a lot wrong, and there's a lot. I was on the phone today. We did a benefit a couple of weeks ago in Santa Cruz for Monarch Family Services, which works with, violence, human trafficking, abuse. And they work both with families. They work in the prisons with the abusers to try and break that cycle. I mean, they're an amazing organization. We were glad to play a benefit for them. We were honored to do that. And just meeting Kesey from Monarch, she told us some things about human trafficking that I didn't really understand. For example, that a lot of the people that they deal with that have been trafficked are being trafficked by their own families. That was news for me. I've always thought it was like more runaways or more immigrant, and there's that too. So, I feel like there are a lot of ways that we all need to be working to make a difference and, pick the ones that resonate for you.
You're able to still be hopeful?
Yes. Yeah, I am. And I think that things can shift. I mean, when you think that who could have imagined the internet, it's like, and then again, who could have imagined Putin and the Russians, you know what I mean? So every sort of technology or every advance can be used for ill, but it also can be used for good. And I just feel like, that sort of sense of a critical mass to make a change, that critical mass that's necessary. Well, we have no idea what that critical mass is. We don't know just the energy that would come together to make a shift in a positive way that doesn't look possible right now. It could be. And it can be. And so I'm not going to give up on life on Earth. And I think that greed I think a lot of the issues of our time have to do with doing individual work and just going, what is it that I really need? I mean, and I think the millennials and some of the young people now are, just sort of their prime to be, they're already sharing, you don't need to have a car. You could, we could take Ubers, or we could, you don't have to own all these places. You could just do Airbnb or do a house trade or, how is it that we can share the resources and share some abundance in a more equitable way? Because ultimately that's what we have to do. We have to make this giant gap that has come about, particularly in the last 20, 30 years. We need to, reverse that. And we need to find a way to all these things that people, the sense of this necessity to be a consumer. It's an interesting word, all the consumers. What if we just aren't consumers? Or what if we're minimal consumers, and we just look at how do we not consume? How do we make things and repurpose things and just not have this false notion that next thing that I could buy or own or possess is going to bring me happiness. What's going to bring you happiness is singing in a group of people. That's going to be, the studies prove that. It's obvious to me, but it's actually documented. That's going to make you so much happier than anything that you can buy. Past a certain point, yes, you need a place to live. And yes, there's basic necessities. But at a certain point, more stuff is just a burden. It's a burden. Less stuff is more freedom and more less to take care of and more time to play and be with loved ones and do something worthwhile on earth. So, I am hopeful, and I don't know that I will live to see, but I feel that human beings, we may get to the very brink, but I think wisdom will prevail. What did Martin Luther King say? That the arc of history bends towards justice. And justice is much more what we need, We're all in this together. There's either we move forward together or we go down together. And this notion that I can just live in my little ivory tower and my whatever, and my kids will be okay. No, your kids are in the same world with all the other kids, So we just need to address these things together, and it's more fun. Just anything we do together is more fun.
There you go. That was Denise Kaufman of Ace of Cups. Recorded that one while I was out in San Francisco. Really wonderful conversation with a really wonderful band. You can check out their record, Ace of Cups. That's out now on High Moon Records. Thanks so much to her. Thanks to you guys, as always, for listening to the program. If you like the show, there are a number of ways to support us. You can rate and review us on Google Podcasts. We're on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, all the places you get your podcasts. Like us on Facebook. If you have any feedback, it's rwellcast@gmail.com. Follow us on Tumblr. That's rwellcast.tumblr.com. That is the first and best place to get all your RIYL related information. And that's about all we got for this week. So stick around, because we're going to be back at just about this time next week with another episode of RIYL.